Most of us deeply believe this. What we do just doesn't make any difference. One of the indications of this is that we have big ideas about how things should be. Big ideas about how things should be. That's an indication that we don't think that what we do makes any difference. When someone doesn't think that what they do matters, well, their attention tends to go to the way everyone else should be behaving, the way things ought to be around us. And so we have lots of ideas. Things should be this way, and things should be that way. The world should be this way, the world should be that way, I should be this way, I should be that way. But our attention does not go to, what can I do right now? What can I do right now? Because we don't think that there's any efficacy, there's any impact to that consideration. We're far more interested in whether things are the way we think they should be. Things are the way we think they should be, well, that's good. If things aren't the way we think they should be, well, that's bad. But in any case, there's not much to do about it. Now, we like this doctrine because it feels as if it gives us a kind of equanimity. It feels kind of good, doesn't it? It feels good to think, well, what I do doesn't matter. I can do bad things, they're not really bad. I can do good things, they're not really good. So it doesn't matter. So I feel better. I can relax. And I can put all of my attention into worrying about whether things are the way I think they should be. Without getting into what can be done about it right now. This seems like equanimity to us. We have the impression that it's equanimity, but it's not. It's apathy. It's insecurity. It's indifference. It's a lack of self-confidence. None of these are equanimity. And this view is in no way compatible with compassion, but equanimity is totally compatible with compassion. Ultimately, it is compassion. Compassion is equanimity. But for many of us, that's the only kind of equanimity we have access to. This view gives us a kind of equanimity. And actually, this view, you can torture and oppress, steal, etc. And it's not evil. It doesn't really matter. Don't worry about it. Or you can help, do good, give, be truthful. No good is done. Don't worry about it. This is literally, as many of you may know from modern books on meditation and spirituality, this is literally the view that's given. This isn't just some view that Purana Kassapa had 2,500 years ago. This is an extremely popular view. And you can look up the most popular books on spirituality, our kind of spirituality, and see that this view is succeeding. Just read the titles of the books. They're describing this view with pride. This is equanimity. This is how you do it. But in fact, this view is extremely dangerous. And we have to see it as dangerous. We have to observe it in that way. Because if we set ourselves up as utterly inherently helpless to make a difference, to have an impact on suffering, then that is suffering. We all know that Cameron here goes through a lot of difficulty. He's dealing with all kinds of issues, doesn't know what to do about them. New things come up all the time. Have things worked out, and then suddenly something changes and nothing's worked out. Oh, there's pressure on him. He often fails, makes mistakes. And yet, there's a strong argument to be made that he's the most fortunate person here. Why? Because as we've seen over the past year, he has gradually, very gradually, but gradually, started to overcome this view. Starting to face the fact that what he does matters. It actually does make a difference. If you see things clearly, better things happen than if you don't. There's a price to be paid for this good fortune, and that is the possibility of seeing that we made a mistake and that it matters. And I'm giving each person a bit of a taste of this, because we see the positive impact that it has on people. A bit of a taste that what you do matters. That means if you make a mistake, it matters. This is the price we have to pay. It's a price we have to get used to paying. And Cameron is a little bit getting used to paying this price. It is possible to make mistakes. It is possible to do things wrong. And when we do, it's not okay. We like to say that. We say, well, it's okay, don't worry about it. But is that true? Is it okay? When we think it's not, we get so tight we shut down. And so we think, well, then I'll use this view. It doesn't matter, whatever. And we feel like that should open us back up. But it doesn't. It shuts us down more. And it shuts us down on a far deeper level. Because it's a statement of absolute truth. It's an attempt to clarify the way things really are. The way things really are is that you don't matter. What you do doesn't matter. Your decisions don't matter. Your actions don't matter. There's no evil. There's no good. There's no outcome of evil. There's no outcome of good. When you hurt someone, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And there are no consequences of that. Meaning no pain, no suffering comes back to you. If you help someone, there's nothing inherently good about that. And there's no outcome of good, meaning no happiness comes back to you. To break through this is very difficult for us nowadays. We believe this so deeply. And that's why we can say that Cameron is so fortunate. Because he, for whatever reason, threw himself into a situation in which day after day he needed to face this. Day after day had the pressure of needing to make a real decision that would have real consequences. Every time it being possible that it would be the wrong decision. Every time being possible it would be the right decision. That there would be benefit. That there would be negative consequences. This is a view that has to be scoured out of our hearts. Cameron's aware of this scouring process. It's not something that just happens in a moment. It happens bit by bit through effort. And of course it does, because this view is wrong. The efforts we make to overcome it matter. What we do does matter. What we do does have consequences. And eventually we start to be able to actually see that, as Cameron is. There actually are consequences, and we can see it directly. When we see that directly, we can step out of this view, to a certain extent at least, and become adults. Because let's face it, this view, this is a childish view. This is maybe a teenage view, we could say. Whatever, I don't know, who cares? Big opinions about how other people should be, but indifferent regarding what I'm doing right now. As you'll note, if you look at this, if you read it carefully, you'll see that there's no explanation for why this is. There's no philosophical justification. We'll see in many of the other views that they have a very impressive philosophical justification. Here there's nothing. It's just an assumption. There's just an assumption that what you do doesn't matter, it isn't evil, it isn't good. We don't know why. But we nonetheless attempt to come up with certain justifications for it. And we have to beware, we have to be very careful of these justifications. One good one is, well, I just had to do that bad thing in order to learn my lesson. This is something I hear all the time. It's an attempt to justify this. I had to do that bad thing, otherwise I would never have learned. We can see how even the explanation actually isn't in accordance with this view. But the way it justifies it is still very dangerous. It justifies it by saying that doing evil can have good consequences. Now, if we make a mistake, then we can respond to that mistake in a good way, and that has good consequences. But the doing of the evil does not have good consequences. We can respond to it. We can take a further action that has good consequences. We're not stuck. It isn't that we do evil and then that's our destiny forever. But it is the case that what we do matters, and each thing we do matters. There's no thing that we do that doesn't matter. There's no time we can take a break. Each thing we do makes a difference. So to say, well, I just needed to do that bad thing, is saying it just doesn't really matter if I do that bad thing. It needed to happen. Furthermore, one may say, well, who knows? Who knows what's good and bad? A sort of moral relativism. I mean, who knows? Sometimes you do something bad to someone, but then they learn from it. And they're actually better off because of it. Sometimes you think that one thing is a good thing, but actually a different thing is a good thing. So you do the thing that you thought was good, but actually something bad happens. This is a philosophical confusion. This is denying that our intent matters. At one point, I was on a walking trip, an extensive pilgrimage through Japan. And I asked many people for help on that trip. I was doing something that people couldn't really understand. I was wearing the full robes. of a monk. I had a walking staff. I had those wooden clogs. Very hard to walk hundreds of miles in wooden clogs. And it was weird. This white guy wearing these traditional clothes, in the summertime, walking to Kyoto. Why? Who knows? He's not even taking the shortest route. What's going on here? But I had very practical questions to ask. Like, where's water? And something that amazes me when I do this is that people really don't know. When people really don't know what you're doing, they give surprisingly poor answers. So for example, if I asked, how do I go a certain way? People would sometimes give an answer like, well, just go up this road a few miles. And I'm pretty sure that the turn is up there. Well, if you do that driving, and it turns out to be the wrong thing, it's just a few minutes. But if you do that walking, and it's the wrong direction, that's a day. Your day is gone, and it's very painful. Furthermore, if you want something like water, it's very hard to walk a few miles and then find out that there isn't water. That's very difficult to walk back or to have to find a different place to get water. So people gave me very poor answers a lot of the time. I was surprised how poor their answers were to very reasonable, simple questions. Or for example, where's a lake I can swim in? Because it was very sweaty. I had a terrible heat rash and needed to wash off the salt out of my skin sometimes. Those were very reasonable, practical questions as far as I could tell. And it's important to know that sometimes people gave me incorrect directions that actually turned out well. And sometimes people gave me correct directions that didn't turn out too well. And this was fascinating to me because it really mattered to me. The answers people gave me really mattered. There was a big impact, which I could feel with the pain of every step. And something that I started noticing was that when I interacted with someone and we had a friendly relationship and they gave me instructions with the intention of helping me, mysteriously, they did, even when they were wrong. This I found fascinating. Somehow, our intention, our friendliness, our care does make a difference. It isn't necessary for us to come to the point when everything's perfect. Another way that we justify this view is that we say that until everything's perfect, we can't do anything. And again, in this organization, we've seen that view presented repeatedly. Until everything's perfect, we can't do anything. There's this issue, and until we've totally resolved it, we can't do anything. This is actually a variation on this view. It's saying that until this situation is exactly the way I think it should be, nothing else really matters. What we do doesn't matter except if things are this way. This is paralyzing. Expect things to be perfect. And what's amazing, what's particularly impressive, and the reason that I feel confident that this view is what's at the basis of that, is that under those circumstances, when people have made that argument and we have asked, okay, what should we actually do then? What should we do to get to the resolution of this problem? And we get a real answer, a feasible step that we can actually take, and then we take it. They are very disappointed, angry, frustrated. They are increasingly likely to see us as the enemy. And often people leave. Why? Because we did something. We demonstrated that what one does matters. Not just what one thinks about how things should be. Although, that's also a kind of doing that matters. Our actions make a difference. And yet, if our basic belief is that our actions don't make a difference, then when we're in a position of seeing that our actions do make a difference, we feel very threatened. Because we're in this position, because we're so stuck in the position of thinking that what we do doesn't matter, because this has become such a prominent doctrine of our age, we look around at what's happening inside of our own hearts. We come to a place like this and we sit, and we come to see more and more clearly how deep the issues are within us. And we use that awakening to the incredible pain, ignorance within us. And we use that to prove that there's nothing we can do about it. It's so big that nothing we do is going to make a difference. Why? Because we're constantly trying to interpret everything in terms of things don't make a difference. So when it turns out that there's a lot to be done, we find a way to come to the conclusion, well then, there's nothing you can do about it. The same way we look outside at the world situation, it's so big. There's so much. There's so many problems. There's just nothing you can do about it. So, the only thing to do about it, again, it's hypocritical. Each of these views is inherently hypocritical. We say the only thing to do about it, even though it doesn't matter what you do about it, but still I want to do something about it because I'm a hypocrite. Only thing to do about it is to come to the conclusion that what you do doesn't matter. You can't do anything about it anyway. And this disables our compassion. It disables our ability to look at the world and see something has to be done, I'm going to do it. It disables our ability to see clearly in the moment that what we do does matter, that that's directly observable, that there are consequences of what we do, that those are real and that's directly observable. And furthermore, there is this outcome of merit. Outcome of merit means that if we hurt someone, then that will come back to us. This is karma. If we help someone, that will come back to us. Also karma. That our intention helps others and it also helps us. We start to be able to actually see that happening if we pay close attention. But this kind of insight is threatening to this view. And because of that, we ignore it. We don't look at it closely. And we might think, well, so what? It doesn't really matter. It's the view coming up again. Try to see how deep it is within us. But it's because of that at this point, we have come to this following sentence. Our history has brought us to this sentence. If one were to reduce all the living beings on this earth to a single heap of flesh, by doing so there would be no evil or outcome of evil. That is literally what we're doing. This is real. And people aren't that worried. People aren't that concerned. We're really concerned about other things, like what that person said to me. That's a real big issue. But in terms of what I can actually do to save the living beings on this earth from being reduced to a single heap of flesh, of bloody flesh, killing the living beings of this earth, actually do something about that, I mean, what you do, you can't do anything about that. Come on. What you do doesn't matter. Not really. We have to see how extremely dangerous this is. It's dangerous in terms of how we interact with the world. It's dangerous in terms of how we interact with ourselves. Because we see the same patterns coming up again and again in our minds. And each time that we don't break through them, we conclude again, well, there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing to be done. This is just too big to deal with. But we don't see that we ourselves made that happen by not noticing the power of the effort that we put in. And not noticing that in the moment of observing that effort, of seeing the effort doing something, that there was an impact. By not paying attention to the outcome, the gradual outcome. We're not willing to take a year getting this scoured out of our hearts, facing pain and insecurity, breaking down, falling apart, failing, causing problems. We're not willing to go through that. On the contrary, each time those things happen, we just use it as further evidence, as, see, doesn't matter. I was trying, it didn't work. There's nothing you can do. This is beyond us. And then we descend deeply into this view and say, well, so what then? Action is not effective. What I do doesn't matter. It's necessary for us to cut this out of our hearts, to look at this very closely and notice it when it arises and break through it, that we can come back to what is visible here and now. Not this philosophical assumption, which is all this is. It's just an assumption. We have to return to what's actually happening here and now. Observe what we're doing here and now. And what are the consequences of that? What can we observe happening in terms of cause and effect? Directly observe. There's a new kind of power that emerges when we see that what we do does matter. And people can sense it. People can sense that. And people are attracted to that because we actually want to escape from this view. That's why it's often said that it's not that charisma is what gives a person the ability to lead. On the contrary, leadership, being a leader, is what gives a person charisma. You can just be a leader, and in doing that, you gain charisma. Charisma comes with that. We don't have to only go in that direction. It's not only how we can impact ourselves. We have the ability to impact others as well, as it says here. If one acts or induces others to act. Both are part of our karma. More and more nowadays, we're seeing that if you're teaching someone, for example, a child, it's not very effective to say, oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're so special. To praise their qualities. That isn't a helpful thing for people. What we should do is praise their effort, praise their diligence. Say, oh, You did really well on that test because you worked hard, rather than, oh, you did well on that test because you're smart. It's very important for us to promote the view that what we do matters. The efforts we make matter. Because if we do that, if we promote that in ourselves and promote that in others, at a certain point, we can directly see it. We can directly realize it. And then ultimately, we can directly see that it is possible to break through our ignorance, that we have the ability to do that. Of course, we can go through long periods of time without doing that, and so we use that as evidence that we can't. What we do doesn't matter. We try, doesn't make any difference. But at a certain point, we can actually do that. And with that comes an almost disorienting wonder, a dizzying power. I realize we have the power to cut through the ignorance of my own mind. It's joyous, it's confusing, and it can take time to get used to it. It can take time to adapt to it. The same way that it can take time to scour out this evil view. But this is what's possible for us here.